So we begin our lecture. The topic is uh, taking an ethnographic perspective towards the research in the area of folk and minor art. To understand the topic, we must go through different details about the nature of any kind of cultural studies that has some sociological aspect. And when we look at habitual art or folk and minor art that is connected to all these kind of categories, which can be better defined as vernacular art, or there can be different term given to that. That is also a matter of greater research. So we'll try to understand this from a ethnographic perspective, and there are researches that are done in the area from that point of view, and that made it even more relevant in the context. So, according to K.G. Subramaniam, a culture cannot survive in isolation as a conserved habitual entity or by depending solely on market demand. The society is changing, so individual ethnicity and sophistication might predominate uh, over the community scale. There are possibilities that the way it's surviving in today's context may not prevail for long. And it's also seen that slowly it's focusing on the individual skill, the individual understanding. It's only the visual style that is evolving and still maintaining its identity. And I think we have discussed in that matter in detail in the earlier lectures, and I provided you with the clue to understand it in a greater detail. And after that, to understand its ethnographic significance, we are walking the same route with a slightly different bend. So, if we quote another cultural researcher named Angela McRobbie, she suggested a general method in cultural studies that is popularly known as 3 E's. Angela McRobbie's method of 3 E's are empirical, ethnographic, and experimental. That has a sociological angle to the cultural research. Working with living human tradition involves empirical changes in socio-cultural fiber. According to Michael Pickering, a cultural researcher, according to him, the implication of research methodology is examined as the experience is often common to both researcher and the researched. What he meant by that uh, can take a different perspective as we match that with our previous study, where we felt that this is a both way happening in the field of research, where the researcher and the researched object, uh, when the researched object is also something which is connected to human livelihood, or human being as such, then it's a two-way process, and there it goes through some synergic condition where both are benefited from each other in the process of research, and that makes it more fascinating yet complicated. We talk of lived experience, but experience always involves interpretation of what happens in life, of what makes our perceptions, feelings, and actions meaningful. This depends on how they come into expression and are conceptualized, organized, and given temporal identity, or, in other words, how experience is given the quality of narrative. Michael Pickering, Experience and Social World, page 19. So, it's all about how we relate to the outer world and conduct research in that perspective in mind, which includes feeling, actions, and that gives the meaning of our study. And we feel the study is worthwhile and can be taken further. So, it also provides us with vision to connect stories with each other into a frame of narrative. So, when we say that we are transforming our experience, we represent it uh, into a narrative connection. So, it gives us the story, and we build up the living conditions, and where it is coming from and where it stays, how they're leaving, where it is going to, and it gives us the timeless identity of the past, present, and future. So, for this context, we are picking up the second E, which is the ethnographic angle, the methodology that follows the ethnographic perspective for the cultural research. And then what we see that the study of folk culture has a structural division. One, it's form centric, and two is oration centric. Pradyut Ghosh, in his study in the book named Bangla Lokoshilpa, or the folkloric practice of Bengal, refers to a group of anthropologists who embraced folklore as the holistic cultural phenomenon, whereas Samuel P. Beard indicated its all including quality, that it includes everything into it. And let's see what are the things that it includes. Pradyut Ghosh looks at it as the holistic cultural phenomenon, as I said. Samuel P. Beard calls it the all including quality, is emphasized in his writing. Kenneth W. Clark and Mary W. Clark quotes that folklore is a universal topic. Its substance includes material from all areas. Study of folklore, according to Pradyut Ghosh, include food, mental acts, language, amusement and recreation, festivals, health and treatment, body language, and of course art. Folk life similarly include cookery, faith and belief, folk literature, sports, comics, religious festivals, medicines, dance performances, art and craft, folk culture, that is our course of study for now, that includes domains like history, that turns into cultural history, geography, anthropology, sociology, psychology, fine arts, aesthetics, and linguistics. Folk art follows the need of local inhabitants in terms of taste and the use of method and material. Folk art is seen as a successful culmination of complex primitive emotions. Binay Ghosh is a very important name that in his book Poshimbonger সংস্কৃতি, the culture of West Bengal, refers to Gordon Shell's social evolution theory by Gordon Schell. Where he says that there's a prescription of another modular classification in the area of folklore as being evolutionist, diffusionist, functionalist, and structuralist in nature. In Europe, this kind of art practices are recognized as peasant art, traditional art, colonial art, regional art, provincial art, naive art, and so on. But the art forms have fine differences between them. They flourish in a unique but restrictive conditions such as isolation, lack of academic education, lack of material wealth, regional confinement, local medium, mechanically simple process, characteristically accomplished and non mechanically done, the lack of accuracy, uncommon imports, single craftsmanship, orthodox style, repetition of common mode of style from time immemorial, and free from foreign influences. So, the artistic impulse is matchlessly mingled with elements of natural endowment, hereditary skill, environmental ethics, and cultural awareness. That also ensures its cognitive qualities. Art is all about expression, and in folk art, expression is based on cognition, feeling, affection simple and complex emotion. It remains a crucial question as it like how classical norms rule the elementary compositions of folk painting. When we look at them, we feel that there are lots of traditional canons or compulsory examples that they are following in a regular basis, and we often wonder that what must be the reason. But it's not very difficult to also understand that when they belong to a culture and getting exposure to the classical texts through many different reasons, because their work is constantly connected to the religious and cultural texts throughout, and they are exposed to many different texts, and that way they're illustrating, they're interpreting all those things. They will be influenced by the basic content of them, and will definitely be curious about finding out the main resources, the sources rather. So, in a way, when we look at the compositional aspects, we see a local traditional temple which is patronized by a local ruler, which is coming up in some places. The folk artists are watching them, also picking up motifs and the forms which are highly classical, or maybe it has a eclectic quality into it, but they're picking them up and personalizing it. They're representing it in their own typical style, and that is the beauty of it, of this personalization, making it your own, and representing it, representing it several times in your own way. That makes it very unique. However, we'll just try to see that how they got influenced by some of the old texts, and that worked as an operational factor behind setting up the rules for the folk art and its practice. So, as we see that the paintings are rich in mythological content, and that seldom have arbitrary notions in the conception and execution. The myth, moral, grammar, cosmology, genealogies, metrics and rhetoric of Veda, Purana, Upanishad and similar ancient texts as a passing knowledge periodically influenced the fiber of Indian folk paintings. Vishnu Dharmotar Purana that I was mentioning, that has worked as a source for their work for a very long time. In the third Kanda of Vishnu Dharmotar Puran, we see there are information that governs all traditional and ritualistic activities of ancient time, because this is one book where some rules were written, and the rules were also followed, and that is quite evident. It's quite obvious that those rules were followed later, and the principle that are written there in a conversational form, where there are characters like Markandeya and Bajra, they're sitting together in a conversation, and it's a discourse that is taking place, and through their dialogues, their conversation, they're teaching the traditional painters the methods of art, what has to be followed, which are the compulsory rules. They're also going to the core of the ethos of image making and picture making. So let's read a small part from there that is translated by Stella Cambridge. That's Vishnu Dharmottara Part 3, a treatise on Indian painting and image making, second revised and enlarged edition, Calcutta University Press, printed in 1928. Like I'm reading from page 3 to 5. Vishnu Purana may not have been there earlier than the second half of the 4th century CE. The chapters of Vishnu Dharmottara that deals with painting must have been compiled in the 7th century CE. The text canonized the measurements of body, leg, face and proportions through a conventional discourse between Vajra and Markandeya. Markandeya said, "Without a knowledge of the art of dancing, the rules of painting are very difficult to be understood. Hence, no work of this earth, O king, should be done even with the help of this too, for something more has to be known." Vajra said, "Please speak to me about the art of dancing and the rules of paintings. You will tell me afterwards, for, O twice born one, the rules of the art of dancing imply those of the art of painting." Markandeya said, "The practice of dancing is difficult to be understood by the one who is not acquainted with music. Without music, dancing cannot exist at all." So it gives us another clue that it talks about a completion that takes it to the level of performing art, which has all these different mediums of expression complementing each other. So without the knowledge of music and rhythm, dance is incomplete. Without the knowledge of dance, drawing is incomplete. It's almost like if a person is dancing, that means they're creating form, and those forms are highly ephemeral. They're just getting created and disappearing during a performance. And when they're creating the same form with the help of brush and ink, it's just staying in that place for a few more time. And that is the relation between all these things. And they are so well synchronized, the whole idea, that is perhaps working as a guiding factor that gives it the source of sustenance, that it's a completion of knowledge, and that indicates to the multidisciplinary aspect of it. So the expression of painting is not self-sufficient according to Vishnudharmottara Purana, and gets multiplied in effect with performance and reaches completion. Ultimately, the text uncovers rule of color application, composition, scale, proportion and style to achieve the aesthetic parameters to strike a balance between the subjectivity and objectivity of artistic expression. In order to analyze the contemporary range of folk paintings, it is considered important to link them with the ancient text to follow the thread of changing in the execution and the truth of conformity to traditional roots. Bharat Shilpe Murti, that means form or idol, the form in Indian art, translated by Sukumar Rai. Some notes on Indian artistic anatomy, written by Rabindranath Tagore, and another book, Sadanga, or the Six Limbs of Indian Painting. The Indian Society of Oriental Art has published it in Calcutta 1921, are the two very good sources of information related to the rules of traditional art in Indian and Chinese context. This is purely for your reference. If you really want to know what were the written rules in classical art forms, these are the two sources, and I would like to share some of the information to you additionally. And the Square and Circle of Indian Art by Kapila Vatsyayan, the second edition, 1997, that book is available by Abhinav Publication, is another very important source where the doctrine of Indian art and aesthetics is duly documented. The practice of folk painting is regional and grows in isolated locations that we know, and it varies in style and execution. Sometimes the style is very consciously protected into a community or into the state. They have their own policies to protect them within the state, and it's also an experience for many that when we talk to the folk artists of today's time who visit galleries, who participate in different workshops, who interact with each other, they sometimes feel that when they work with another craftsman or another uh, folk artist from a different culture, from a different region, which is not very far off, they belong to a same country, and they share the same ethical value. They feel that the style that the other person is following, there are lots of things to take from there, but still they try to maintain their own identity as their style, like any other fine artists who appreciate the other style but still stick to their own style of expression that gives them their own identity, that keeps them rooted and grounded. So, I'll mention quite a few points that you note down. So, the ritualistic foundation that decides the compositional organization connected to the ritual of Vedic yajna, Vedic yajna, Natashastra, Vastu Purusha, Shilpa Panjara, and Sangita Purusha. That is largely followed by the artists, architects, sculptors, performing artists, who work with Indian principle, which is traditional, they are studied to realize the holistic connection, uh, the connection with the holistic principle that connect the streams together despite multiple diversity, and that is a realization that works as an outcome of a ethnographic study. So we look at them from a purely ethnographic perspective at times that includes all these things. So looking at them from the aesthetic perspective is just a part of it, and it's part of a cultural study. So we need to also incorporate a little bit of uh, cultural, historical methods to understand it fully. And there we follow a mixed method where it's not just experience, as we said, because experience is also working both ways. And it is also very important to know that experience cannot just happen, because experience is also an outcome uh, of observation that happens with a whole lot of preconceived notion into us. We discussed earlier also that even if we go from a free flowing and total original mind, then also we cannot be totally free from our previous experiences, because the present now is just becomes past within a second with the blinking of an eye. Apart from those ideas, we can simply understand that the moment we experience, we have the urge to interpret, and that happens as a natural process, and there's no point dividing them and restricting the natural processing that our brain does as a natural activity. So their experience, documentation, observation quickly gets translated or transformed into interpretation, and the interpretation builds up narrative with by connecting all the experiences together into the form of a story. And that is the beauty of this study, and that keeps us excited to go into the field of this research over and again.